It's September 17th, 1862. The Irish Brigade, a group of recent Irish immigrants who came to the United States and were finding that they were unwelcomed. They were sped upon, called names, told to go back home to Ireland, find themselves here at Antietam. Whether they were recruited, drafted, or volunteered, they fight with great zest. And at Antietam, they've already watched multiple waves of Union divisions attack the Confederate defenses at the Sunken Road. Each wave repulsed badly, each wave with heavy casualties. Now it's their turn. And they carry with them the stars and stripes and their regimental colors, that green flag with the golden harp and the red banner. And they're chanting in their native tongue, Ba'ala, ba'a, bala, ba'a, bala. Clear the way, clear the way. They get to the Sunken Road where they face a very well-defensed Confederate soldiers. And they fight, and they fight, and they fight, and they hold their own. And they lose a lot, 500 men. And they changed the Sunken Road to a name known better as Bloody Lane.
Charge.
I am here at Antietam National Battlefield. Robert E. Lee has brought the war north, and he has brought his Confederate Army up here into Union territory of the state of Maryland. This is one of the first of his two northern invasions. And today at Antietam, the bloodiest military day in U.S. history with nearly 25,000 casualties in one day. It's a lot to cover, and it happens in one day. But before we begin, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you're always aware of any time I upload these stories about the Civil War or any of the other classes that I teach. Now, back to Antietam. So how did we get here? Well, first, let's rewind a little bit. 1862 is not going well for the Union. In the West, the victory at Shiloh came with such high losses. Some in Union leadership were criticizing Grant as a drunken murderer. Meanwhile, in the East, it was going far worse with a string of overwhelming defeats. McClellan was bamboozled by John Magruder for a month on the peninsula in April. Stonewall Jackson, who was outnumbered nearly 4-1, went on a 5-battle winning spree in the Shenandoah Valley for the Confederacy. McClellan was defeated by Lee at the Battle of 7 Days, causing Mack to retreat from Richmond. Then Lee smashed the Union Army at Second Bull Run in the summer. Hope was fleeting for Lincoln. And although Southern pride was exuberant with the series of wins by Lee, the Virginian knew the clock was ticking, and time would never be a friend for the Confederacy. Wars are often won because of attrition, and Lee knew he did not have the resources nor manpower to match that of the Union. Knowing that Northern sentiment was wavering on giving up and that England and France were intrigued in the Southern cause, and as well as Virginia crops were nearly non-existent after months of heavy fighting, Lee decided to take a gamble and invade the North. If he wins a major battle in Northern Territory, he believes cities such as Washington, Baltimore, or Philadelphia would fear being captured, and Union sentiment would finally break, seeking peace. A win would validate the Confederacy and bring in much-needed alliance from Europe. A win would allow his troops to live off northern farms. Lee also believes that just him entering the slave state of Maryland, Southern sympathy would rise and the residents would join the Confederacy. This was a gamble worth taking, a gamble that was needed, a gamble that would ensure the end of the war. Lee will enter the state of Maryland on September 3, 1862 with 55,000 men. However, instead of being welcomed with open arms and celebration, the Southern troops were looked upon coldly. There was no shift in Southern sympathy, as only a small number of around 200 Marylanders joined the Confederates. This would be the same as Lee hosting a major party, sending out all sorts of invites to the popular kids, spending money on an exclusive DJ and a gorgeous ice sculpture, but having only Deb, Pedro, and Napoleon show up, who spend the entire time at the punch bowl.
They don't like me.
As Lee is grasping with the disappointment of not attracting Maryland, he will also have a further setback. On September 13th, a copy of Lee's Special Order 191, which detailed every troop movement and the numbers of his army in Maryland, was discovered by Barton Mitchell and John Bloss of the 27th Indiana. Barton found the orders wrapped around 3 cigars. The two shared it with their officer, who eventually had it forwarded to General McClellan. McClellan literally had Lee's playbook, and a narcissistic Union general proudly boasted, "Here is the paper with which, if I cannot whip Bobby Lee, I will be willing to go home." Now, side note, Mitchell and Bloss, who found the orders, were not given the cigars back. Further insult to injury, they both will be literally injured at Antietam. Come on, Command, give them those cigars back. Although McClellan had Lee's plans, Mac still waited 18 hours to do anything about it. This gave Lee critical time to regroup his forces, take the high ground at Sharpsburg near Antietam Creek, and build a solid line of defense. Mac will have 87,000 men with him. Lee, only 40,000. And on the morning of September 17th, McClellan finally makes the order to attack. It's 5:30 in the morning, and we're at Dunker Church, and this is where Thomas Jackson, Stonewall Jackson, has his troops in camp. It had rained the entire night prior. The guys are miserable. They've been wet, it's cold, they haven't had a warm breakfast in ages, and now they're here at this place of peace, a church. They're getting ready to cook their finally first warm breakfast in days. They're excited about it. No more hardtack. You guys know what hardtack's like. But then, through the cornfields, right over here, they notice a little reflection, something hitting silver. And they look through their spy glasses and see it is the Union Army marching through that cornfield. They're not going to have that hot breakfast this morning. No, they're going to be rather upset because it's another day of engagement. The Battle of Antietam will be 3 different major waves of attack, almost like 3 battles, at 3 different points on the field. The first will be a Union assault led by General Fighting Joe Hooker along the further northern part of the field in the early morning hours throughout a cornfield. Unfortunately for Hooker, opposing him will be Thomas Stonewall Jackson. So this cornfield right here is the cornfield which the Union Army is marching through. And as you can see, each of the corn stalks are around 8 to 10 feet tall in height. So it's giving them great coverage and camouflage and hiding their movements, except for their bayonets is reflecting the sunlight off of them, warning the Confederates, who are all along over here, now making a defense and firing a great volley, a deadly volley into this cornfield. The fighting in the cornfield will be a series of back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, as Union and Confederate troops attack and counterattack. After Hancock's initial attack is repulsed, in which the general is actually wounded, General Mansfield will join the fight. As Robert E. Lee invaded the North, coming into Maryland, a 40-year veteran, General Mansfield, had been begging for command. And he had 40 years of experience. So, with Lee marching into Union territory, Washington promoted him on September 15th in charge of the 12th Corps, giving him finally his first command. 2 days later, here he is at Antietam, leading his troops into battle. And it is this point right here at this battlefield, about 2 hours into the first shots, about around 7:30 in the morning, Mansfield is ordering his men in through these woods to also attack Stonewall Jackson's defense. And Mansfield becomes concerned because he thinks his guys who are right along this line are now actually firing into his own men. So he rides up to the front and says, "You're firing into our own men. You're firing into our own men." And they're like, "No, sir. Those shots are coming from the Confederates." And as bullets started flying by Mansfield, he says, yeah, you're right. About right after that, a bullet pierced his right chest, going out through his back, and he will eventually die from his wound. A command of 2 days. The cornfield switched hands nearly 15 times between Confederate and Union forces and will be a sight of sheer carnage. No division, however, will experience a deadly assault like the 1st Texas. The 1st Texas, under Kentuckian John Bell Hood's corps command, entered the cornfield upset their breakfast had been interrupted, and therefore they moved with speed and anger. Unfortunately for the 1st Texas, due to the cornfield's height and thickness, they had no clue that they were moving so fast that they had gotten well in front of the rest of Hood's command. And when they were alone in the front, they came across Union cannon firing deadly canister and a line of infantry behind a stone wall. Those Union guns unleashed a devastating volley, and the 1st Texas will suffer 82% casualties, the highest percentage in any battle throughout the entire war. At the end of a day, when General Lee was assessing his losses, he asked General Hood, "General, where is your division?" And Hood responded, "They're lying on the field where you sent them. My division has been wiped out." In 2.5 hours of fighting in the cornfield, Union and Confederate casualties were in an astounding 8,000 men, and yet the battle had just begun. Nathaniel Bedford Forrest will famously say, "War means fighting, fight means killing." And those here at this battle are seeing all sorts of carnage. Clara Barton, frustrated that the Union Army isn't getting the supplies needed to those that are wounded and dying, rushes to the battlefield here, and she arrives at noon. And while she's taking care of the wounded here at this spot, the launching spot of Fighting Joe Hooker's attack, she feels a little tug through the sleeve of her dress as she's taking care of a guy, giving him water. And it wasn't the guy that tugged at her dress, so she lifted up the sleeve of her dress and she sees a bullet hole. She looks back down to the gentleman she was just caring for and sees he's now dead, had been shot right in her care. Barton will stay here at the rest of the battle, and 3 days later continuing at caring for the wounded and dying. Clara Barton's heroics at Antietam will earn her the nickname Angel of the Battlefield. Her valor and dedication to medicine will help save countless wounded soldiers throughout the entire Civil War. But her greatest legacy comes after the war, and that is when she's the founder of the American Red Cross. With McClellan's first assault at the cornfield resulting as a failure, Mack moved his attention to his second wave of attack, the Confederate center, which will be better known as Bloody Lane. And this brings us back to the beginning of this story here in the sunken road, now known as Bloody Lane. The Confederates, again, had only 2,000 guys holding this little piece of land, and they were facing a much larger Union force coming at them in this second wave of an attack. Because the first wave, over by the Dunkirk Church, this is the second wave, and there will be a third wave that way we'll get to here shortly. Much like the morning assault in the cornfield, the sunken road will see a series of Union attacks. The fourth wave of these Union attacks came from the Irish Brigade, who took 540 losses in just their wave alone. But what was different about this wave of attack, besides the regiment being Irish immigrants, was that it was escorted by Father Corby. The Catholic priest marched with his regiment in the attack and could be heard shouting prayers of absolution to the soldiers as they were being killed in action. Father Corby shared that the prayer was not only for his Irish brigade, but any soldier on the field, Union or Confederate. Through the ministry of the Church, may God give you pardon and peace, and I absolve you from your sins, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. After the war, Father Corby will return to Notre Dame, becoming president of the university and opening up the school's law school, and responsible for the building of the famous Golden Dome. Eventually, the heroics of the Irish Brigade and the follow-up assaults by Union forces were able to break Confederate lines at the sunken road.
The Union troops, though, once they get to this position, finally able to break the Confederate lines here due to a horrific miscommunication by some inexperienced officers in the Confederacy that caused the 5th and 6th Alabama to sort of retreat when they weren't supposed to be retreating, thus creating a vulnerable position here. The Union forces are able to come up to the top of this and actually have several Confederates trapped in this sunken road, and it's like shooting fish in a barrel or sheep in a pen. They will continue to press, but the Union line that had finally broke this Confederate stronghold is too weak, too exhausted to continue moving forward. They petition General McClellan, and they're like, hey, we got the Confederate center broke. We have them on the run. We can win this battle. We could possibly win this war right here. McClellan, send us reinforcements. And the young Napoleon, Mac, will respond, it wouldn't be prudent. It wouldn't be prudent, Mac? You could win right here. And you're not going to send 20,000 fresh troops? But that's the little Napoleon for you.
Two waves of attack have resulted in failure for the Union. The morning assault was repulsed by Stonewall Jackson at Dunkard Church in the cornfield. The second attack in the late morning, early afternoon was pushed back by James Longstreet at Bloody Lane. Now, Mac is left to his last option, an assault on a bridge at the southern portion of the field.
And this brings us to our third wave of the Battle of Antietam. This bridge, which will be known affectionately as Burnside's Bridge, because General Ambrose Burnside, who wins, and you can see him right here, for best facial hair throughout the entire Civil War. Matter of fact, the reason why we called these things sidebirds is because of this dude right there. Well, Ambrose Burnside has been ordered by McClellan to take this bridge and get his troops on up over there. But for him, he has to go against 400 Georgians who are all up on that hill, and they have guns and they are shooting, and it's a very narrow gap on that bridge, and it's going to take a wave, another wave, and another wave of Union troops to try to get this across this narrow bridge. Imagine almost like the movie 300, only this time instead of 300 Spartans, it's 400 Georgians, and instead of 100,000 plus Persians, we're looking at just around 20,000 Union soldiers trying to make their way across this little gap.
The narrow bridge over the deep Antietam Creek limited Union troops in the crossing. Much like the other two locations of the battlefield, Union forces were sending wave after wave with little success. General Burnside asked Colonel Ferraro to take the 51st Pennsylvania and the 51st New York to take the bridge. Ferraro, however, was in disfavor with the 51st Pennsylvania because he had recently taken away their whiskey rations.
All right, fellas, the general, he wants us to take this bridge and get up on that hill and clear out those Confederates. We got to take this. It's up to the 51st, so let's go 51st and do this. Hey, Colonel. Yes, Corporal. If we take this bridge, will you give us our whiskey back? Corporal, if you take that bridge, I will give you your whiskey back. Let's go, boys.
Needless to say, the 51st, well, they found the resolve and motivation to secure the bridge. Once they had established a foothold, the small group of Georgians were quickly overwhelmed with the superior Union size, and they had to retreat. But for over 3 hours, the drastically outnumbered Georgians held their ground, and those 3 hours will be key in this battle.
Although those 400 Confederates were able to hold this upper hill line for quite some time and repulse several Union assaults, because again, that bridge is very narrow and it is the only way Burnside can cross this area. Once they break and the 51st has crossed, and they get that whiskey back, the 51st has crossed, Lee is now in a very dire situation, dire indeed, because now Burnside has the ability to cut off Lee's retreat, because there's only one way for Lee to retreat across the Potomac, and that is right over here. And now Burnside is able to get to it. If McClellan just reinforces Burnside, again, this is a major victory. The Army of Northern Virginia would be completely captured and surrounded. There is no escape from it, and maybe the war ends in 1862. But Lee is taking a gamble. He's not reinforcing this side of the line because he is hoping that A.P. Hill will join in time.
Lee's gamble paid off, as Burnside was still establishing a foothold on the Confederate side of Antietam Creek, which will give the Union a chance to cut off and escape for Lee. A.P. Hill will rush in much like Gandalf the White at Helm's Deep. Hill, who had been 17 miles away at Harper's Ferry that morning with 2,000 men, marched his division as fast as he could, leaving behind stragglers so he could make it to the front. And they made it within 8 hours. They marched it in 8 hours. They arrived by 3:30 in the afternoon, right as Burnside had successfully crossed the line. Burnside pleaded for reinforcements from McClellan, who responded, "I can do nothing. I have no infantry." Yet, with McClellan, he had 2 fresh corps at his command. That was 30,000 fresh troops with him, and he said he didn't have any infantry, that he could do nothing? Oh, Mac. Dear Lord. At the end of the day of the 17th, Lee had held off 3 massive Union assaults, even though he was outnumbered by nearly 50,000 men. At the end of the day of the 17th, McClellan had twice received news his men broke Confederate lines. He simply needed to reinforce the attack to finish off a job, and both times, Mac refused to send the needed support. The next day, the 18th, the 2 forces looked at each other from across the field. A truce was made to retrieve and care for the wounded, and on September 19th, Lee, knowing he could not withstand another attack, will leave the field and retreat. The Army of Northern Virginia will escape unmolested back to the Confederacy without a Union counterattack from McClellan. Lee had held his ground, but the retreat means Mac gets credit for the win. But the win came at a horrific cost. Lee will have lost 1/3 of his army, McClellan over 1/4 of his army. Union forces will have 12,400 casualties. The Confederacy will have 10,320. In one day, the battle will have 22,720 casualties, which was more than 2 days at Bloody Shiloh. Antietam will be the single bloodiest day in U.S. history. To give another context of its sheer number, 22,000 plus casualties in a single day was nearly 4 times the American casualties at D-Day. Take note, though, of the 12,400 Union casualties. We'll talk more about one of the wounded later this semester, a captain in the 2nd Massachusetts at Antietam by the name of Robert Gould Shaw. You may already know of him if you watched the Oscar-winning movie Glory. At Antietam, Americans for the first time see the grim nature of war. Yes, they have read the long list of names of dead in newspapers in prior battles. But 2 days after, battle photographers Alexander Gardner and James Gibson captured the bloated and rotting dead at Antietam. These vivid and graphic photos brought the war to the doorstep of the civilian for the first time in world history. As Union General William Tecumseh Sherman will later say, "War is hell." General Lee escapes back to Virginia unmolested from a Union counterattack. On October 2nd and 3rd, President Lincoln visited McClellan, who was still at Antietam with the Union Army. The president begged Mac to follow up on Lee, and Lincoln knew how to play to the narcissistic little Mac by building a general's ego, telling him, "Mac, you have won a great battle, and we can have a victory parade in your honor before the end of the year in D.C. if you would just follow up on Lee and end the war." But Mac told the president that was impossible. On the early morning of October 3rd, the president, along with his good friend Ozias Hatch, walked up a hill overlooking the camp of the Army of the Potomac. Hatch, what is all this?" asked the president. "Why, Mr. Lincoln, this is the Army of the Potomac." Lincoln replied, "No, Hatch, no. This is General McClellan's bodyguard." A few weeks later, on November 5th, with McClellan still not making any movement towards Lee, the president will finally fire the general. Mac, however, will still find a way to be a thorn in the side of Lincoln. In the 1864 presidential election, McClellan will be the Democrat nominee. Although the Union win at Antietam is due to General Lee leaving the field, it still was a win, and Lincoln needed to win. With the Union win, on September 22nd, President Lincoln will issue his executive order known as the Emancipation Proclamation. The proclamation read that any slave in a state that was still in rebellion on January 1st, 1863, shall be thenceforward, and forever free. General Lee was banking on a win to end the war, but the loss at Antietam was costly to the Confederacy. Not only does Europe refrain from making an alliance with the Confederacy with the loss, but Lincoln's emancipation of slavery causes both England and France to look at the South as an unmoral and unworthy cause of support. Lee's gamble turned out to be costly, and it was a losing bet.
So this brings us to the end of Antietam. On September 18th, the very next day, Lee does not leave, even though he's been defeated. He's been whooped up by McClellan, but did McClellan really win? So that next day, on the 18th, both just sit here, and then finally, on the 19th, Lee retreats and escapes back across the Potomac to Virginia. McClellan, he will wire home to his wife saying that he had, quote, a magnificent victory. No, Mac, you didn't. You cost a lot of lives here. And let's face it, Mac, you could have ended the war in April of 1862, but you were bamboozled by a thespian and 10,000 guys to your 100,000 guys. And then when you had the chance to attack and capture Richmond for 7 straight days, you defeated Lee, but 7 straight days you retreated to Lee. And then at the Second Bull Run, when Pope was needing your help and reinforcements, you refused. And now here at Antietam, you had a chance for victory in the center. All you had to do is bring 20,000 troops, or a second opportunity to take this and cut off Lee's retreat, and yet both times you don't. McClellan, you failed the Union Army. And history has every right to judge you as a failure because you were not willing to risk. Guys, when we compare Grant and McClellan, the two major Union generals that we will look at, you look at Grant, who was always calm, who had no fear of failure because he could make adjustments if he was failing. And then you look at McClellan, who was always afraid of failure, so he refused to risk. Well, which one saves the Union? Guys, as always, make sure that you leave a comment or a question. I really appreciate it, and definitely do subscribe. Thank you for being a part of this journey. As always, remain awesome, be nice, stay safe, and I'll see you soon.